So, hello everyone once again to Fugitive Chef's podcast. This week we have Jozef Youssef. Jozef, welcome to the podcast and thanks for making.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
So, Jozef, I would love to hear how you define what you do these days. But my first exposure to Jozef himself was, I think I was back in Mugaritz some 6 years ago now, and they had this library, which was my first. I think after leaving India, coming to Spain, it was my first exposure to cooking books. And I think there was this first season where I was done with reading cooking books and I thought like I should read something else. And they had this book called Gastrophysics. I think it's by Charles Spence, and there's a lot of work of yours in it, a lot of quotation to your papers and works done together. And that was my first exposure to gastrophysics. Back then, it seemed like a world which I felt I would never work around or get a touch point with it. Luckily, with the work now, there's a lot of work around sensory science, so that is a great place to be. But yeah, Jozef, tell us about yourself. How do you define yourself?
Well, I guess Kitchen Theory, we're an experience design studio. For about 12 years now, we've worked with Professor Charles Spence, who you mentioned, on researching what I consider to be the fascinating world of multisensory flavor perception. So that's really understanding people's sensory and psychological relationship with food and understanding how we can better understand sensory and psychological relationship in a way that we can maybe design food experiences that encourage people or nudge people towards making more sustainable, healthier, more nutritious food choices. But aside from that, a big part of our work is in designing immersive, multisensory dining experiences.
That's super exciting. It does make a lot of sense to me. A lot of words do resound to me. I think through the podcast, also the idea is to break this down to a more, I think, approachable, simplistic form of understanding for people who are listening to this, maybe through some examples of your work. But before diving into that, I would really like to know, Jozef, what was your first touch point with food? Like, how did it start? What form of career choice or educational choice got you into this world?
I mean, I've always enjoyed cooking, but I think it was after graduating university that I really realized that I wanted to work in hospitality. And to do that, I started by working in some great Michelin-starred kitchens here in London. And that was a way of kind of, learning the art and the craft from some great people and working with some great chefs. And then I guess it was around 5 or 6 years into working in kitchens here in London that I started becoming interested in this idea of molecular gastronomy I'd always kind of been interested in, but I started becoming interested in actually applying it myself and, trying out these new ingredients and cooking methods and techniques. And one thing led to another. I ended up writing a book on molecular gastronomy, and then that is, I guess, what got me interested in the sciencey side of gastronomy. And that led on to me then meeting with Professor Spence at Oxford University and getting embroiled into the world of gastrophysics. And I went down a rabbit hole that I still haven't popped out of.
Yeah. And you mentioned, as you said, you worked at some great restaurants. You worked at the Knot, at the Fat Duck. But do you remember, before?
Well, I did a placement there. That tends to get overblown. I did a placement at the Fat Duck. It was a great
Fat
6 weeks, but
Yeah.
beyond that, and obviously chefs like Heston and Ferran Adria and these kind of guys were, people that really kind of paved the way for the kind of work that we're doing and what interests us. And I think as well as Sella de Can Roca.
Mhm.
And numerous kind of other Paul Perret and numerous other chefs around the world who have kind of paved the way for more experiential dining becoming more commonplace. And I think what we try to do is just continue innovating in that same vein and creating a more interesting, more immersive, more experiential food and drink events that people can kind of engage with and that are very narrative and story led. And I guess a big part of it is engaging people emotionally through
Mhm.
food and telling stories using food. And so that's kind of, the journey.
Yeah, for me, what's interesting is because this podcast happens to be something which is more focused on. I think there's enough podcasts focusing on food specifically or a certain restaurant specifically, whereas my interest lies more into there must be many like you, who are working at all these restaurants that you named, working over there, doing stages, traveling around, even reading the books. But how does that kind of exposure lead to someone like you finding their own niche of a career within something which is being explored at the same time? So, my question was during all this exposure, do you remember your first instance of something that surprised you, something that you did in a restaurant and you said, okay, this is not what I thought I would do as a chef, and now, I could dive into this whole of what is molecular gastronomy?
No, not really. If anything, no, if anything, it was what pushed me into kind of an interest in molecular gastronomy was I'd always had an interest. I'd read Hervé Tisse's book when Molecular Gastronomy when it was first translated, and that was many years before that. But it was working here in London. I remember working in one Michelin-starred place that we would use soy lecithin to create a foam or an air. And the guys there used to call it magic powder. And that's basically how little they knew about using it. And I guess I was just curious. I wanted to know what was this magic powder and why did it sometimes work in some preparations we made and sometimes it didn't seem to work at all. And it was just simply figuring out that with a high fat content in whatever you're trying to create, that the lecithin isn't going to create the kind of bubbles. So if you want to do it, you either need to use water or low fat milk or something like that. Anyway, very simple little things, but just by doing a little bit of reading, I was able to figure out. And this bunch of people who, were way more experienced than me in the kitchen, just didn't really, understand it, and neither did they wish to. So that was one of the things that I realized that, there's what you can definitely learn in a lot of these kind of more, let's call it traditional restaurants and Michelin-star kitchens, and depends on which ones. Some are doing some really crazy, modernist stuff, but I mean, from the more traditional ones, and I think that's where you should start because you want to get that very good base foundation under your feet before you start kind of playing around with, doing other stuff. And I think it really helps. I think in any field, right? It's not just with cooking, but I think in any field, even if you want to be a fashion designer, having an understanding of, just basic, seamstress or tailoring skills or pattern cutting and all these kind of things that, or if you're an artist, understanding, some, the traditional methods of art before going off and exploring. So, those kitchens, I learned a lot of the kind of really good basics that you need to in the kitchen. But beyond that, a lot of it was self-taught.
Right. And would you say you were somebody who was, just questioning, were you academically somebody who was interested in science? Like before kitchen, were you an academic person, you would say?
Yeah, I went as far as going to do a degree at university, bachelor's degree, and I probably would have continued on to doing a master's, but I was eager to get out and start working, and that seemed more appealing to me at the time. So, yeah, I think what meeting Professor Spence did in what was it, 2011, was it kind of ignited that academic interest that I had kind of had at university, but hadn't kind of pursued beyond that. And so that kind of satiated that interest by working with him and others on kind of writing academic papers and doing research. And, that was definitely one of the reasons why I set up Kitchen Theory as a studio rather than trying to open a restaurant or something like that. And it was because when you have a restaurant, what I found is that, all of them are just putting guests, bums on seats. So it's just lunch, dinner, lunch, dinner, lunch, dinner, and you're worried about your gross profit margins and you're worried about, running a business like a restaurant it's not the most lucrative thing to do in London unless you have maybe the right kind of investors. And if you want to do something that is truly your own and creative and you don't have to conform within anyone else's kind of guidelines and you can experiment as you please and you can have the free will to not be trapped by maybe the shackles of convention and the status quo, which if you want a Michelin-starred restaurant, you kind of have to, right? Otherwise you won't get awarded one if you don't fit within a certain kind of criteria. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I guess there's a lot to be admired about those places and the consistency and what they're able to achieve. But I guess, for me, the idea of the one dimensionality of a restaurant wouldn't satiate all the other kind of interests I have in gastronomy, which are far broader from its science, history, culture, psychology, how you could, we've worked with people like Dr. Roberto Trotta at Imperial College. He's an astrophysicist, and one of the many projects we worked on with him was looking at how we could use food as a medium for communicating more complex ideas in space to those who are either, well, partially sighted or have no sight. And that was at the Royal National Institute for the Blind. And just to be able to kind of explore using food as a vehicle for education, for giving people it was really touching, actually, the response that we got to doing that activation, because a lot of the people there felt touched by the fact that people had tried to engage them in a way beyond because I guess when it comes to space, what's probably important to point out, when it comes to space, a lot of how it's described to us is using visualizations. Mm-hmm. And so if you're visually impaired, then you never really get to maybe visualize these concepts. Someone coming along and giving you food, which, food has a lot of the same kind of concerns that you would with deep space. So when you consider mass, volume, temperature, density, all these kind of ideas, and you think how you can play with these textures and little bites or foods that you give to people that communicate a message or communicate an idea or a concept. And so, whether people may listen to this and think it just sounds all a bit balmy and wacky, and maybe it does, but someone's got to do it, right? You've got to explore these things, and I find it deeply interesting, and it's nice when you can do something as well for people that they find emotionally engaging.
Yeah, who would guess, right? I mean, all the knowledge that you took from restaurants, and then getting deeper into with Professor Spence into the knowledge that lies behind it, and then applying it to something which I think at the first hand you would not think that would be the place to apply it, but yeah, marvelous the amount of applications you can find. Also, what is interesting for me is I was speaking to Johnny Drain the other day, and he was mentioning the same, that he came from the science world, doing material science at also Oxford, and then getting into restaurants. Whereas your path is more from like restaurants into the more scientific side of things. And one thing that he shared is, which I also see a lot with my current work right now, the challenge being that a lot of knowledge lies in kitchens and people who started all these processes back in the day, but most of it isn't very documented, which becomes a challenge, and chefs are not really used to documenting the process of how research should work. Did you say when you went into these restaurants, I would say with a scientific background or an interest in science, was it something that was challenging, the way chefs or the industry or the kitchen industry works?
Yeah, not from a sciencey point of view, more from I'd gone to university and studied business and IT. So going into kitchens, you find that that's actually what started kitchen theory off, was I just thought that kitchens were so badly managed. Not badly run in terms of, I don't know, hygiene and ability to, produce a great kind of quality product in many cases, but just in terms of how poorly managed people were. And, now things are kind of changing, but we're talking about when I was kind of doing this work, we're talking about, in the noughties, kitchen, the way I guess kitchens were managed, everything from people's rotas to just the behavior and how you kind of deal with one another. Kitchens are very rough. And I mean, look, there's something that you kind of enjoyed about it at the same time. Don't get me wrong. There's something about that kind of work environment that maybe appeals to some. And I like working long, hard hours. So that wasn't the problem. I think what I did find a bit frustrating, though, was some of the, even like, for example, I remember seeing an English commie waiter and a French chef de partie get into a blazing argument one evening, all because of just a very basic miscommunication. And a big part of it had to do with kind of cultural awareness and just cultural understanding and being able to work with people from other countries and understand that they may express themselves slightly differently. And you just think there are so many things that you could do within these work environments that would improve the management and therefore the overall function, if they're putting out great food, like, and this is how the engine works, and this is how the back end of it works. Imagine if they really, streamlined it, they did something incredible. And that's something that even, you hear horror stories about all sorts of kitchens, even the best of kitchens. When you're in the industry, you hear these kind of, horror stories of how chefs have been abused or treated, or the hours they've worked, or the how, the general kind of outlook isn't, kind of great. But I think, as I said, I think a lot of that has changed. But it was more that I think I found disappointing than a lack of scientific prowess in the kitchen. I mean, till now, that's not something you're really going to find. There's a handful of kitchens around the world that are maybe engaged in scientific research and, taking it seriously and really want to be doing something more meaningful with it. I think there's a lot of chefs out there who are maybe interested in this stuff, but are they interested in actually the research part? No, probably just using the end results of the research and maybe working or collaborating with scientists to put something new and interesting on the table. But whether they're kind of, what the motivations are for it, I don't think it's really coming from an academic place.
That's super interesting, and I think it's reason enough to. And I think many of the people have that reason of like maybe saying that I have a better way to work these things out, or I think this can be done in a different way. But I think the structure of a restaurant still seems to be very limiting on how the business is. I think people are finding their formulas to work within that structure. But for you yourself, what was your first point of not working in a kitchen? What was your first thing that you did after not working in a kitchen?
Well, I didn't actually. What happened was I started Kitchen Theory as kind of an online blog while I was working in the kitchen. Then we started doing pop-ups while I was still working in the kitchen. So it meant that I got 0 days off for about a year. And then it seemed like it had some legs. So I left full-time employment in, I think it was April of 2014. And took that leap into running Kitchen Theory full time.
And what was the idea back then of Kitchen Theory? Because I would also like to hear how Kitchen Theory is now. How did it evolve from the idea of?
It started as I said, as a blog, and it was just me. So that little rant that I just had there about how poorly run kitchens are, it was just me writing blogs about stuff like that and how I think it could just be improved. And it was more just me writing for me. Mm-hmm. So you finish work really late, it's hard to sleep, you have all that adrenaline flowing, and so at times I just sit there and write, and then a few people saw it and said, oh, you should post it as a blog, so I did. And then 2013, I think it was, that Ferran Adrià had done his retrospective of El Bulli here in Somerset House in London. And it was that summer that I decided that I wanted to start doing. I'd been toying with the idea of doing pop-ups, but that's when I kind of going there and kind of seeing that just was the maybe kick I needed. I thought, well, how long am I going to be going to other people's exhibitions? Let's start doing something of our own. And so within about even less, probably about 2 months, we set up the first pop-ups by Kitchen Theory, the concept was called Elements. And then it kind of just, it sold really well. And we got featured in like the Metro, and it just happened to do quite well, that first one. You think, way, this is going to be great. But then, over the last 12 years, it's been all sorts of ups and downs in getting it to where it is today. But yeah, it evolved then into kind of doing more corporate kind of bespoke concept design work as a studio, and then our permanent chef's table. And so it's kind of evolved from, quite a bit from where we started.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say, I mean, for somebody listening to you right now who has seen your journey, more or less heard about it, how you evolved and doing the pop-ups, I think it's a good escape to test the grounds. But today, I think if I ask you what your day is like, it might be very different, but what's your general week like?
It really depends on what we have lined up. Different times of the year vary greatly. So, I mean, we work on a mix of different things. So obviously I'm present at a lot of the services and events that we do. So that can range from doing chef's tables at our studio in Holborn, or it can be events both here in London or internationally that we host for brands. Most of the we've got, let's say, 2 to 3 concepts that we'll be developing at any one time. Um, and each one of those comes with working with various different agencies, working with different producers and venues, developing bespoke menus for each of those experiences. And that involves obviously doing quite a bit of research first into the brand or the product that we're developing the experience for. I mean, we do a fair bit of traveling for events. Saudi Arabia has become a kind of key interest as a market for us and the events that we do. And I love doing events over there. Lovely people, very hospitable, loads of great energy over there, and loads of really cool F&B kind of concepts that are kind of popping up there and that are happening. Um, and yeah, so yeah, that's kind of what the where we're at the moment.
Hmm. And now that you mention all these things, it does sound like, for me, like picturing that kind of an agenda. I mean, it could be busier some months, but not that busy some months. But would you say, does it compensate the change that you made? Because you mentioned, right, how mismanaged restaurants are, how much time it requires for maybe not that great results. So comparing your life back then, if you were somebody who stayed in restaurants, maybe started a restaurant, compared to what you do now, would you change something, or do you see it good how you've done things for yourself?
Oh no, I'm very lucky in life that I happen to be one of the few people that can say they absolutely love what they do. So I'm very lucky and blessed in that sense. I mean, we get to create, as I said, at any one time of the year, we're working on about three, well, 3 to 4 projects. These can range from working with companies like Virgin Galactic on designing something around, space dining experience. It can be working with brands like Cartier on designing, an experience for the launch of a flagship store for them. We are working with Audi at the moment. Well, we've worked with them since 2019. We're working with them at the moment on, menu around their electrification range. And so we get to work on so many interesting and diverse concepts and ideas all through the year that um, I don't think I could find that kind of creative outlet in any other kind of hospitality or kind of restaurant business. So doing what we do is very niche and very unique, but it means that we really get to do something that we love doing. And when you're creating, it's not just about creating a new menu. It's about creating a new menu. It's about looking at the projections, the lighting, the production, the theater that goes around with it. Every different sensory touch point, what you smell, what you touch, what you hear, what you feel, everything is curated for these experiences. So you get to go in some kind of great detail. The devil is in the detail with designing these kind of experiences. Given the kind of range and the different themes and topics that we get to work on, it really does push you as well in terms of your creativity to continuously have to come up with new ways of bringing something interesting. And people come to us because they want something different, they want something innovative, they want something creative. I mean, these are the words that you're hearing from pretty much every client, whether it's a car company, whether it's an electronics brand, whether it's a cybersecurity or data storage, or you name it, whatever. In 2025, people are coming to us because what they're looking for is innovative, cool, unique, different experiences to deliver to their guests. And that's what we do. But there's that pressure then that you continuously have to be coming up with these cool, creative ideas and concepts for them.
And how would you say you're feeding yourself with that creative, yeah, the energy? I mean, I guess food world isn't the only world you're trying to contaminate yourself with when you have to give that much of output with the limited input there is in the world.
Um, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I find a lot of creative inspiration in music. I find a lot of creative inspiration in looking at the brands themselves. I love the challenge. I love the challenge of, having being given a coffee machine and said, okay, we need to create a 5-course menu that's going to sell. This coffee machine is going to, really sell its values and its key messages, and it's going to tell us all about. And, it's not that coffee isn't wonderful, but it's nonetheless, it's interesting. It's challenging. It makes you think about designing menus in completely different ways, because you're not designing around In some cases, you are designing around specific ingredients, but a lot of the time you're designing around a concept, you're designing around an idea, you're designing around some kind of narrative or story that you're trying to tell. And we start when designing the concepts by, first of all, understanding from the client or fleshing out from them what the overarching concept is. And then from there, you start to figure out what the kind of key messages are for each course. And that's what kind of helps you say, is this going to be a 5, a 6, a 7, 8 course menu? What's it going to be? How many stories are we going to tell? What are these stories? And then as you flesh these out, you start to kind of arrange them into where you think they sit well on the menu. And it's only really at that point where you start getting into the details of, right, how are we going to bring this to life through food and flavor? And how are we going to tell these stories in a way that makes sense to the diner without having to sit there and you've got about, every time you introduce a dish, you've probably got about maximum of about 90 seconds of people's attention to relay a message. So it's really the dish that has to do a lot of the talking, in the atmosphere and the environment that you create around them. And that's, and the smartest dishes and the smartest concepts are the ones that, like onions, there's lots of layers to them. They're not just clever on one level, they're clever on multiple layers. And what you want is guests to have those little aha, or that's clever moments. That's what people are paying us for, is to create those. And to get, especially in, I'd say more in corporate situations, to get people pulling their phones out, taking content, and whether that's influencers, or whether that's press, or whether that's VIPs, or you name it, whether it's even internal stakeholders, it's about engaging people. And that's a big part of what we focus on, is engagement and edutainment, this idea of educating and entertaining people. It's not just educating them in an academic sense, it's educating them maybe about a brand, or about a product, or about a theme, or about a concept.
No, it's very impressive, borderline envious of the kind of work that you're talking about, because you don't have to also consciously go out and look for inspiration, because most of your work revolves around working not just different industries, but also leaders of those industries, and seeing how they can inspire to your creativity. But moving away from the commercial side of things, Joseph, what about the whole research end of things? Is there any more work done, as long as, I don't know, I know you work with universities also, like giving lectures over there, researching about basic research. How's that going? Or
after the pandemic, a lot of that slowed down, and that was because obviously we were in a position like everyone else in hospitality, where you were just trying to kind of make sure that you kept the business alive in some way. And so the research for the last let's say 3 or 4 years has, I'd say, slowed in the sense of the amount of research that we're publishing and that we're putting out there. But what it's allowed us to do is grow now to a point where the kind of research that we're looking to do has a slightly more tangible kind of output and more of an impact. And you see that the kind of research we were doing in the past was great, and it was fun, and it's kind of little things that you can do, but you think, how much is this doing to really kind of change things? And so I'd say one of the focuses that I have, and that we're slowly kind of making progress with at the moment, there's 2 parts to it. One has been something that we've been working on now for several years, which is, the most I can really go into about it is more on the culinary side. But it involves, a lot of it's inspired by the research that we do. And we've actually written a paper about the idea of nutritionally dense ice creams for the elderly who may be suffering from calorie deficiencies. So it was specifically research that started with the elderly who were suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia, and looking at how you could really address this topic of calorie deficiencies. In many care homes, there isn't the resources to have one-on-one care, and you find that lots of patients, for various different reasons, don't get enough calories in the day, and that only adds to obviously the severity of their cases. And so the idea had come up around developing nutritionally dense ice creams. And that's something that we trialed just pre-COVID and then ever since have kind of doubled down and focused on working on. So that's one project that's kind of going in the background. And then for the future, I think one of the things that I've come to identify that we'd like to be more involved in is schools and education. Just before the pandemic, and I think the paper was published just after the pandemic, we had done some research in a school looking at sensory interventions with children relating to neophobia and their willingness to eat plant-based foods. And that was really insightful, going into schools and working with children and understanding the kind of impact that you could really have through just very simple sensory play with whole foods and ingredients, and how that could nudge them towards potentially making healthier, more nutritious kind of food choices when it kind of came around to lunchtime. And you think, you know, one session is fine and it's great for doing a bit of research, but what if this could become part of a kind of more permanent curriculum? And so I guess moving forward, that's education in schools has become something of a kind of path that we're pursuing, and looking at how we can take that from these basic trials to seeing how we can have more and a broader kind of impact with that work.
Now, super interesting. And I think what you mentioned about transferring that into a tangible, I think any research should be able to. I know that many industries and many investigation or technical centers, they prepare the research and then they have a tech transfer committee which tries to fit it in. So I think if your research begins with the purpose of transferring it into something tangible, I think, yeah, that's great. From some, I mean, I could not lose the opportunity to ask you, like, how do you define, because we've mentioned gastrophysics, sensory science, but how do you define this branch of science for somebody who's listening who doesn't know anything about it?
Okay, so, well, I think the term, and I'll use Professor Spence's kind of way of, I guess, so gastro obviously relates to gastronomy, and if you use Brillat-Savarin's definition of gastronomy, it's everything that relates to man as a feeding animal. So it's not gastronomy as being very high gastro kind of as we think of it, but just, you know, gastronomy that encompasses everything. And psychophysics. Psychophysics is a branch of psychology that relates to how we react to sensory stimuli in the real world. And you see, what Professor Spence and I, our interest is not just in researching the senses and the psychology related to that in the lab, where our main interest is in researching how that translates in the real world, and hence the collaboration between us, him being a researcher and us being the people that can actually conduct this research at our studio. And so that's where that relationship began.
Yeah, no, perfect. I think that context is important for those listening to you, working with, say, ice creams for senior citizens, or working with school meals, and then creating these sensory experiences for companies.
Well, yeah, so to clarify, the reason the research is super interesting, and it's what, you know, brought Professor Spence and I together. But for anyone out there who knows the world of academia, research doesn't pay. We, you know, to pay the bills to continue doing what we love doing, there has to be a way of monetizing it. And the way of monetizing it is obviously by then going away and designing these weird, wonderful, creative, experiential dining experiences.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, I mean, there's no research which is better than that can sustain itself. I think that's the key, to be able to bring more research in. Maybe not now, but maybe when there is room for it. And one thing I'm curious about, Jozef, because I hear this from many people I interview on the podcast, that the first few years or first few months, when they channel their energy or their career into something which is not the restaurant kitchen, there's a certain guilt, or there's a certain guilt trip of feeling that it's like a cheat way out of working into food, but not having to sacrifice your weekends, not working terrible hours, not sweating through your shifts all the time.
I've always worked hard in kitchens, but I've never worked as hard in my life as I have working for myself. So I can't relate to that feeling of, for 12 years until today, I continue to work all the time. In fact, today is a bank holiday. and here I am. So look, I work 24/7. I love what I do. I'm very blessed to get to do what I do. And so, no, there's no sense of guilt from having left those kitchens. There's something about missing that world. Yeah, I did. I liked something about it, of course. There's something fun about it. But I get to do service through what we do, and it's fun, and we don't have shouty, sweary people, and it's all very nice and smooth and uh, well organized and slick. And our guests notice this because we have an open kitchen as well, and our guests notice this, and it's part of what they like about the experience is watching the theater of the kitchen and watching it kind of unfold. And I guess some people like chef's tables for the sweary drama kind of nature of it, but I think that's less and less nowadays, and I think that's kind of fading out, if anything. But yeah, what do I know? I haven't worked in someone else's kitchen in 12 years, so maybe they are still shouting and swearing at each other.
No, that's a perfect excuse for me to ask this. The follow-up question was, now that you see this changes happen, I mean, even if you're somebody who's been an insider and now looking from the outside, you definitely know more than the ones who have only been on the outside and listening to reports, listening of how pay scale works in this industry compared to others, compared to how the younger people entering the industry are fairly enough asking for more things. Legislation is slowly falling in its place, which is the last thing to follow. So as somebody looking from the outside, how do you feel about this?
Yeah, I also got to say that I think there is something to be said for, like, when I heard recently that the Fat Duck, they pay as stagiaires. Like, I feel so shortchanged because in my day we had to pay like rent and accommodation and transport and all that to go out there and do a stage for free. And there's something about that, though. There is something about and I'm not saying free labor. That's not the point. But there's something about you were willing to go and do that just because you wanted to learn. You wanted to be there. You really wanted to, do this. And I think nowadays there was a certain passion that I just don't see as much in kitchens. At least I think it's harder to find young people that are really passionate and that would go through what maybe people went through before to work in some of these great places. And I think there's something of it to some degree that's character building, and what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. And that's not to say that they shouldn't improve. And as I said, in our kitchen, no one's shouting, no one's swearing. It's a very nice environment to work in. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be difficult. I think difficult things are good for us. I think I've chosen the difficult life by coming and working for myself. I think I've chosen the difficult way by doing what we do and not just opening some business that, everyone gets and it's easy to understand. I think we've chosen something difficult to do by choosing a business that constantly needs to be coming up with new ideas and creating and innovating new dining concepts. But why do it if it's not hard?
Yeah. But what would you owe this to? Because, I mean, this is something which has happened to our industry. It hasn't happened. I mean, I grew up in India, for example. There's a word called struggler, which is everybody who's struggling to get into the Bollywood, the film industry. So that has not followed. There are still people struggling. There are people struggling 100 years ago. So why is it that the younger generation of chefs, you don't see that? And it's not just you. Many people have said the same. So what do you owe that to?
I think it's just a generational change. I think there's more look, never have we lived in a time where there's more awareness around work-life balance and mental health. And those two concepts go fly in the face of working in kitchens of the style that kitchens that I used to work in. And so you've had a generation that have grown up understanding these concepts, and not that they're bad concepts. They are good. I mean, yes, you should, work-life balance and mental well-being are all important. But I work even till now like a dog. And do I care about work-life balance? Not really, because I've got things that I want to achieve in life. So I haven't got time to be sitting there balancing out things. I've got to, I push myself to constantly be productive and to do things. And if it's not being productive in terms of work, it's being productive in terms of going to the gym or spending time with my family, but that's it. I limit it to that. I'm very, very focused on what I do. I spend my time in a very limited way. Nowadays, people, they deserve holidays. They deserve a break. They look, it's just a very different mentality and mindset. And I think, as I said, these concepts of work-life balance and mental health, it just clashes with that industry, which requires long hours, discipline, dedication, and kind of commitment if you really, really want to be great at it and if you really want to achieve great things. And, that's all part of the passion and the romance of it. And people love watching it on TV. I haven't watched The Bear, but I've heard it's a great show. And you think, yeah, okay, I don't know what I know of it. It's quite kind of drama in the kitchen. And I don't know. I don't know. I haven't seen it. But the point is, people love watching this drama on TV. They love watching it on the screen. But do they actually want to be in the kitchen and under that kind of pressure? People don't like taking responsibility. That's the problem. If people are up for taking responsibility, you'll take the pressure. But no one wants that pressure of responsibility. They don't want to be responsible for producing to that kind of level. I don't think. I think it's too much pressure.
Yeah, this is again something I listen very often, and it's also indirectly proportional. The lower the responsibility, the higher the entitlement. I think that's the word. The way you said, people want deserving things to a certain extent, to where it covers your basic human legal need. It's fine, but then until where? And I think it's also careers like yours, which is what the idea of the podcast is, to show that. I think, as you said, everything good is hard, everything good is difficult, but then if you can choose your terms to make that difficult, the difficult you
want. Well, choose your difficult, right? I mean, exactly. Working in a kitchen where, you're not really progressing and not doing anything, well, that would be very difficult for me. I would find that torturous, if I'm honest with you. I already found kitchens quite laborious and boring in the sense of every day you go in, like, my story of the Fat Duck was I went there, and for the first 2 weeks I was like, oh my God, this is the most incredible kitchen I've ever worked. I'm as soon as this placement is done, I give my left arm to work here. By week 3 and 4, I was like, okay, look, it's great. And there's a lot of really smart people here. And I think a lot of the people that I know who were there at that time have gone on to do great things. So I think I was there at a really good time as well, where I met a lot of really, really, really great people. And then by week 4, 5, and 6, I was just like, this is a bit monotonous, isn't it? This is a bit kind of, there's no, so I didn't meet Heston when I did a placement there. I met Heston about 2 years later or 3 years later. No, more, sorry, about 5 years later at the Basque Culinary Center. Oh. And I met him there, and within the first 10 minutes of speaking to each other, he said to me, kitchens are some of the least creative places you can find. And I just thought, wow, that's crazy coming from him, right? But yeah. I agree, because I just think that working in kitchens, lunch is very boring. If you're in the position of being a Heston or being a Ferran Adrià or being a Albert Adrià or being René Redzepi, or in a small minority of your, like people like Jockey or I don't know, these kind of people, sure, you can get to be a bit creative, but all the people that are working in those restaurants don't get to be so creative. Maybe if you go and work in their development kitchens, but there's like a very small team, so how many people get to do that? The point is, it's quite mundane actually working in kitchens, and especially Michelin-starred kitchens. The whole point is consistency. Do not innovate. Do not change things. Do not do what you want to do. You do it like this. Monkey see, monkey do. Don't try innovating. Don't backchat and ask me why we do it this way. Just do it this way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work for me.
No, definitely. I mean, it resounds so much now. It's been like 6 years since I've not been in a professional restaurant kitchen setting. And I think that was even before that, like 15 years ago when I was first in restaurants, I think in Mugaritz or somewhere I heard this first phrase was, I said something like, I was told to do something and I said, yeah, I thought you wanted like that. And before I could finish the sentence that I received was, we pay those who are supposed to think. So you're not here to think, you're here to do. And I think that's exactly what you said. That's what is expected of you. And yeah, those walls limit the chance of creativity.
Well, that's it, exactly.
Yeah. So I think this is why the idea is, I think for me, the purpose is not that everybody has to be a Jozef Youssef or a Johnny Drain or a Josh Whitehead. I think the idea is those who have that capacity. Like, I think, the only person who could have written the book about molecular gastronomy, the only person who could have went on to go and work with Professor Spence. But I think there's something in you which permits you or gives you that push that, I'm not happy with what I have. And I think not being happy with your current state is the biggest force that can pull you towards something better. Because also, like, one thing which is very inspiring to me about you is You do a lot of fitness. I think there was a whole era around COVID. You were doing a lot of fitness activities and things like that. And the idea of a chef in your head is that the big belly, eating a lot, going crazy. And
Yeah, that's I don't know. I think if you're into, I've been into working out and fitness since I was a kid. I think if you're into it, it just becomes part of who you are and part of your life. Yeah, COVID was great for that in terms of there was a lot more time to work out, but I still work out with the same energy till now and work a full week, and it doesn't change anything. It's not whether you have time to work out, it's whether you make time to work out.
yeah, a lot of it discipline. And I hope a lot of what we're discussing here inspires people to give, I don't know, to push towards whatever it is that they're pursuing. But just to keep inspiring people more, what is something that is exciting you right now? In the few things you're doing right now, what is that something that you're looking forward to?
Well, the thing I'm excited about most now in terms of, let's say, just say back to work and what I'm doing is we're creating our first Christmas experience. And that's fun because we've never got to play with that as a theme before. We've talked about it for many years, and then we end up just doing our regular kind of chef's table menu around that time. And it's exciting me because I guess the slant and the way we've chosen to, anything that we do, we'll always put our kitchen theory stamp on. And so exploring something like Christmas, that's got me the creative juices flowing at the moment. So just doing a lot of research on that and excited to see how we can take what is already a very rich sensory experience like Christmas, particularly in the way that I'd say it's celebrated, well, all over the world. And that's part of what's inspired this, is how Christmas is celebrated in other parts of the world. And that's all part of the narratives and the stories that we're telling. So that's got me excited. On a bigger picture of what's got me excited, I've been excited for the last couple of years now with cellular agriculture, this idea of lab-grown meats. I think that's got legs to it. I think it's only a matter of time before vegan products and foods get kicked to the curb and people start eating meat again. Only this time it'll be without harming animals. I think once they get their head around the sciencey aspect of it and that the meat is grown on a bioreactor rather than on an animal. I think once people get beyond that, but all their food is so heavily kind of processed anyway that the fact that meat is created in a lab, like all the other food, is mostly created in labs before it goes into production. So that's exciting me in terms of the kind of future prospects of food. And finally, what inspires me in terms of our business, I guess we've been doing, as I said, a lot more work in Saudi Arabia. Would urge anyone who thought it would be a dull, boring place to go and actually visit it, because it's a vibrant, really unique place with a really unique culinary heritage. I almost feel like it's the richness of their cultural history and heritage I would compare with that of at least Mexican food, Japanese food and culture. They have such a deep, rich, and I'm fascinated. I'm a huge Japanophile. I love Mexican cuisine and food and the history and the culture. And I would say going to Saudi Arabia, although I had zero expectations, we went there to do some events first in 2023. And I was absolutely enamored by it. I think they have wonderful food. I think they have a wonderful sense of hospitality. And I think they have so many interesting projects kind of coming up that if you're in food and beverage and hospitality, I think there's so many opportunities to innovate over there. And they have that kind of thirst and that drive for innovation. And so I feel very fortunate to have kind of met and worked with some of the people that we have over there. So yeah, these are the things that excite me these days.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, super exciting for me. I was actually looking for colleagues who I can ask about this, because we have a project with Saudi Arabia, with the city in the desert they're building, Neon, and then one with the Ministry of Tourism. Yeah, so I didn't know it's that exciting as you explain it. But yeah, we're really looking forward to listen all about this. Comes out of the Christmas project. I think that's something, as you said, it's not just, when you work with a certain brand, a certain amount of people can relate with it. But I think, a topic like Christmas can be, it's a different playground altogether.
It is. And because there's lots of different things that you want to explore, right? You want to explore the wonder of Christmas. You want to explore but creating the kind of menus we do, you also need to think about that satiety. And that's one of the things that we were discussing last week as a team, which is what makes food satiating at Christmas. Is it volume? Is it richness? Is it, the layout? Is it the sharing? What is it that defines, in England at least, a traditional Christmas meal? And just getting under the skin of that and understanding it. And again, as I said, going back to the cooking thing, you need to understand the basics before you can innovate. And likewise with developing a Christmas menu, you need to understand what is it that people are looking for, what will give them that kind of excitement, that thrill, but what will also give them the satiety of having had a great Christmas meal. So yeah, it's fun to work on.
Super exciting. And as we wrap this up, anything you would like to share with somebody? Because I think most people that write to me, that listen to this podcast, are people who have certain ideas. They have a push to like change their career or something outside the restaurants. What would you tell them that could help them make that move?
I don't know if it would help them make that move. I would say they need to think about it very, very carefully in a very considered way. The grass is always greener on the other side. I think especially if you're venturing out to do your own business, it's one thing to be a good cook or a good chef or a good, someone who's great with pastry think that then means you're going to be successful in a business. You also need to think hard and long about how good you're actually going to be at running a business from an administrative and a financial and all the practicalities that come with really running something. Because if you want something, again, go big. If you're going to go big, it's going to make it difficult. And that means that you need to kind of, have the stomach to go through all the highs and the lows of seeing a business through into success. So, and then the other thing is, have that faith in yourself if you think that you can really do it, and then go out and actually do it rather than procrastinating about it, because it's not going to get up and no one's going to do it for you.
Yeah, no, totally. No harm in calculating your risks and taking it. But yeah, thank you so much, Jozef, from like reading your books to watching your work, following it, to having this opportunity to have you on the podcast. Couldn't be more grateful. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.